Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into one of the most, volatile and policy-shaping periods in modern history,
Right.
1968 to 1980. This wasn't just about bell bottoms. It was a time defined by these massive, world-changing shocks that forced the U.S. government to completely rethink its role in managing resources. Our goal today isn't just, reciting a timeline.
No, definitely not.
We really want to understand this core insight, how the U.S. faced these twin crises, right? Energy problems driven by global politics,
Hmm.
and an environmental crisis boiling up from domestic pollution, and how the sort of frantic response to both created the federal policy architecture we still basically live under today.
That collision is absolutely key. I mean, for the first time, the country really had to confront that its national security, its economic stability were deeply linked to events way over in the Middle East,
Right.
while also realizing that, all that industrial success at home, it was actively poisoning its own land and water. It was a pretty brutal reckoning. And the institutions it spawned, like the EPA, the Department of Energy, they permanently shifted the balance of power between Washington and industry.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with the global stage. The root of the problem, oil, and how the Middle East became so central right after World War II. The U.S. position seems clear in hindsight. Access to massive, cheap oil reserves was, paramount.
Absolutely.
And the Middle East wasn't just critical for its oil, right? Its location smack between the Soviet Union, Asia, Europe made securing those supplies and countering Soviet influence a huge part of U.S. foreign policy.
Exactly. Job one was protecting that flow. But that focus immediately created this geopolitical tinderbox.
Mm,
The U.S. deciding to be a firm ally of Israel after 48.
a big decision.
Huge. It created deep friction with the major Arab oil producers.
Mhm.
It was this ideological commitment that, it put us on a collision course with the source of our economic lifeblood, essentially.
And that collision finally happened in 1973, the OPEC oil embargo.
Yep.
You had this coalition of Arab oil exporting nations basically using oil as a weapon. They imposed the embargo specifically to protest American support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War. That was unprecedented.
Totally unprecedented.
What stands out to you about the immediate impact here at home? Because it wasn't just numbers on a page, it felt like a genuine national panic.
Oh, it was instant
Mm.
and very visual. We were suddenly being called an oil-addicted nation, and then boom, the supply was cut.
Yeah.
Oil prices quadrupled, like overnight.
Yeah.
And you, the listener, would have seen those endless lines at gas stations, the rationing rules.
Odd, or even license plates.
Exactly. It threw the whole economy into chaos, leading to stagflation, that nasty mix of high inflation and stagnant growth.
Mm.
Americans suddenly felt incredibly vulnerable.
And before the country could even really catch its breath.
Oh, yeah. Another blow. 1979, the Iranian Revolution.
Right.
The overthrow of the Shah, who was a key U.S. ally, immediately disrupted oil production and exports all over
That
again.
just amplified everything.
It amplified the fuel shortages, the inflation, and it really cemented this idea in the American mind that, wow, these foreign powers hold the keys to our economy.
The government's reaction had to be dramatic then. It shifted from just, overseeing things to actively intervening in the market. It had to.
It really did.
So what specifically did the federal government do beyond just creating a new agency name?
Well, the response was this kind of frantic institutional scrambling. First, you got the Federal Energy Administration, the FEA, in the early 70s.
Okay.
Its initial job was crisis management, monitoring production, distribution, pricing, putting those rationing rules in place we mentioned.
Mhm.
But more fundamentally, it represented the government stepping in and telling businesses, telling consumers how to use energy.
That's a big step.
It led to things we might find strange now, aimed at changing behavior immediately. The national 55-mile-per-hour speed limit.
Right, to save gas.
Yeah. And daylight savings time was extended year-round for a bit. And crucially, they started creating the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR.
The federal oil stockpile.
Exactly.
Mm.
Which was basically admitting, okay, we can't just trust the global market anymore for our essential needs.
That's a huge philosophical shift, isn't it? The federal government, usually hands off with commodity markets, suddenly telling you how fast to drive, when to change your clocks.
It was massive, and it all culminated in 1977 with the creation of the Department of Energy, the DOE.
Okay, the big one.
Right. The DOE consolidated everything. It brought the supply side, geopolitics, nuclear weapons stuff, and the demand side conservation, pushing alternative energy all under one roof.
So the key insight there is,
So the first time, U.S. policy explicitly married energy security with energy stewardship. They realized they couldn't just secure more oil. They had to fundamentally use less and start seriously looking for alternatives.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because while the U.S. was desperately dealing with fossil fuels abroad, this completely parallel movement was forcing huge, irreversible changes right here at home because of the damage caused by those very fuels and, the chemicals that drove all that industrial growth.
Exactly. Two sides of the same coin, really.
And we have to start with the book, right? Rachel Carson's Silent Spring back in 1962. It wasn't just a book. It felt like an awakening.
It really did. It blew the lid off the dangers of pesticides like DDT.
And it linked industrial chemicals not just to birds falling silent, but directly to human health risks. It basically gave modern environmentalism its voice, its narrative.
And that narrative got reinforced very quickly by some horrifying, very visible evidence. We often talk about the 1969 Cuyahoga River fires.
In Cleveland.
I mean,
Yeah.
imagine a river so choked with oil, chemicals, industrial waste that it literally catches fire repeatedly.
Unbelievable.
It wasn't like a natural disaster. It was a self-inflicted wound, a powerful symbol of industrial neglect beamed into living rooms across the country.
And then there's Love Canal in the 70s.
Ugh, Love Canal, near Niagara Falls. This was a whole residential neighborhood built right on top of 21,000 tons of buried toxic chemical waste.
Just buried there.
Yeah. And residents started seeing alarming rates of illness, birth defects, miscarriages. This wasn't abstract. This was toxic waste poisoning families in their own homes. It made environmental cleanup feel immediate, personal, urgent for everyone.
So these disasters, plus Carson's work, they all kind of built up to the first Earth Day in 1970. Millions of people mobilized nationwide. This wasn't some fringe thing. This was huge public demand, a loud signal. Americans wanted the government to step in, make environmental protection a federal priority.
Absolutely. The public pressure was immense.
And the legislative response that followed was just dizzying. How did Congress, which had mostly let states handle pollution before, pass such revolutionary federal laws so fast?
It was like legislative whiplash, honestly. But that public mandate was just undeniable. So 1970, boom, the EPA gets created.
The Environmental Protection Agency.
Right. Centralizing all federal power to regulate air, water, chemicals, waste, and crucially, giving the EPA federal enforcement power to override local or state resistance if needed.
That's key.
Then, same year, the Clean Air Act. Revolutionary. It set national air quality standards, empowered the EPA to regulate emissions from factories and, importantly, from cars.
And then water.
2 years later, 1972, the Clean Water Act expanded federal oversight over all navigable waterways, aiming to actually restore their health.
These weren't small tweaks. These were profound legal economic shifts. They instantly put major industries head-to-head with the federal government,
Absolutely.
which was now legally required to enforce ecological stewardship, not just divvying up resources, but actively protecting them.
Precisely.
Think about the Endangered Species Act of 1973, providing legal protection for threatened species and their habitats. Was there immediate pushback, like when the feds could halt a big project over, say, a tiny fish?
Oh, immediately. The ESA was maybe the boldest statement of federal ecological power. It essentially said sometimes the value of an ecosystem outweighs immediate economic gain. The famous early test was the snail darter fish, halting the huge Tellico Dam in Tennessee. Industry, local politicians, they were furious. But the law held. It signaled this new era where federal power could protect even the smallest parts of the environment.
Okay, so now we have to look at the intersection, where these two massive forces, the desperate need for energy security and the demanding for environmental protection, crashed right into each other.
Yeah, the collision point.
Policymakers looked at the OPEC crisis, looked at the burning rivers, and thought, nuclear power. That's the answer.
It seemed perfect on paper.
Well, yeah. Nuclear was pushed as the ultimate bridge, right? It offered energy independence because the fuel, uranium, was mostly domestic. And environmentally, it was seen as clean, no smog, no greenhouse gases like fossil fuels. It looked like the perfect technical fix for both the geopolitical and the ecological mess.
That narrative, that promise of perfection was really powerful. And the industry was ramping up fast, but the public was always a bit wary of big, complex tech and the potential for, well, catastrophic failure.
And that caution was brutally validated in 1979, 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania.
TMI, yeah.
Oh.
It wasn't a full Chernobyl meltdown, but it was terrifyingly close.
What happened
A
exactly?
partial reactor meltdown, right in a heavily populated area. There was a release of radioactive materials. The long-term health impact is still debated, but the fear was absolutely real.
Right.
Nearby residents were evacuated. The whole drama unfolded live on TV. It was immediate, visceral.
And it just generated this intense national fear. It completely shredded the credibility, really, of the government's ability to safely manage this supposedly perfect technology.
Totally.
What was the lasting impact of TMI, policy-wise and economically?
It was decisive.
Mhm.
TMI didn't kill nuclear power entirely, but it slammed the brakes on its expansion in the U.S. almost overnight.
Just stopped it cold.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Public opposition skyrocketed. Getting new plants permitted or built became nearly impossible. It completely undermined that whole strategy for energy diversification and independence the DOE was pushed.
And institutionally.
It forced immediate, much stricter federal safety regulations on the nuclear industry. And it cemented that public skepticism about large-scale tech solutions, a skepticism we still see today.
So what does this all mean when we step back and look at the legacy of this decade, 1968 to 1980? What's the big takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway is that the 1970s was the decade the U.S. government became fully, inescapably accountable for both national security through energy supply and the health of the national ecosystem.
Both at once.
Exactly. The institutions created EPA, DOE, the SPR. They laid the foundations for modern federal governance in these areas. They proved, really, that domestic policy, global politics, and environmental health are now just inseparable.
And this shift in public thinking seems permanent, too. That post-war idea that industrial growth automatically equals national prosperity, that got fractured, didn't it?
Definitely fractured. Americans were forced to connect economic development with environmental risk. And that created this persistent, powerful tension we still wrestle with today. Economic growth versus energy security versus environmental protection. It shapes almost every major debate in Washington.
The sheer speed of change between 68 and 80 is just breathtaking when you lay it out. Rivers on fire, oil shocks from abroad. It forced the U.S. government to completely redefine its job description.
Yeah, from just a market referee to an active protector of both national resources and ecological health.
A massive transformation.
And that framework, that's the legacy we really want you, the listener, to mull over.
This period set the stage for essentially all our future policy debates, whether we're talking climate change strategy now, how we roll out renewables, or even that ongoing argument about federal versus state power when, a river's polluted or the air's bad.
It all traces back.
Almost everything we argue about now in energy and environment traces right back to the crises and the legislative rush of the 1970s.